Hello. This is an attempt at something slightly different. So I'm recording this in a different way to normal. But this is a what if requested, possibly by accident, by Dunrik or Dunrik Ironhammer on here. On the Discord for Alex Clark's naval history discussions, where he asked what would happen if 1066 went differently. So the idea was, what if the invasions by the two groups of Norse who came to try and depose the Saxon Harold Godwinson happened the other way around? So that's William of Normandy, who became William the Conqueror in real history, and Harald Hadrada of Norway. What if the two invasions happened differently? Now, very, very quickly, the background was that King of England, Edward the Confessor, as he's now known, at least, died childless. He appears to have had pretty much no interest in women. Certainly didn't have any children with his wife, who was the daughter of Godwin, Earl of Wessex, who was the father of Harold Godwinson, who succeeds him as kind of the Earl of Wessex, which is a position where he's kind of the most powerful noble in the kingdom, borderline more powerful than the king, and also Tostig, who doesn't get on with Harold, and I think quite a lot of other people. Now, the other part of so we've got three claimants to Edward to the throne of England. And it's complicated, and none of them really have a very good, strong claim. And equally, none of them, there's no one else with a better claim necessarily, because the English royal line at this point, the Wessexes, is weak and has been kind of petering out. So the Harold Godwinson and that family, because the problem is that most people use patronymics at this stage, so it's quite difficult to kind of trace them back and say, oh, this family and that family, but So Harold Godwinson's line goes back to one of the elder brothers of Alfred the Great, so they are a branch of the House of Wessex, but Alfred the Great had lived nearly 200 years before, so this is sort of like Britain going back to pre-Queen Victoria to look for a monarch. Although actually in some ways that's kind of what happened and how we got Queen Victoria. So we're talking quite a long time ago. And of course, this being Saxon, Anglo-Saxon, and I know that that is a term that is uncomfortable in some places, and I will try and avoid using it, but really that is the term used for the English at this point, and it has been hijacked by apparently a load of extremely unpleasant people in North America in particular to refer to kind of white people who possibly their descendants, their ancestors would have spoken English, which is unhelpful because, of course, the Anglo-Saxon era is kind of the first wave of post-Roman Germanic invasions and settlement, or at least kind of massive cultural influences. It's not quite clear quite what happened there in terms of how much there was fighting and how much there was actually just room for expansion. There doesn't seem to have been as much conflict as we thought, but right now we're talking about the 400-500s, and I'm talking about 500 years later. It's about as relevant as the machinations of Henry VII and Henry VIII at the moment to us today. So big time history. So we have Harold. I may need to draw something because I wasn't going to use slides or anything. We have Harold, and I'm going to use my cheap and cheerful whiteboard here. We have Harold making a claim. So he's on the throne. So Edward the Confessor dies on the 5th of January. And on the 6th, before the body is even cold, or fully cold, I mean, it's pretty cold, so it's probably, it's like still working towards room temperature, he is crowned king. Slightly dubious, but supposedly elected and approved by the Wittengemot. Yes, that's the term from Harry Potter. It actually is what they call these things, the Witan. And he is the King of England. He is elected because the King of England is the person who is kind of chosen by the nobility, by the kind of High Council, which is what the Wittengemot is of England. It is not a direct hereditary position. Theoretically, anyone could be appointed, but for a long time, it has always been somebody from the House of Wessex. Okay, so we've got Harold. The other thing is possession being 9/10 of the law. He's actually in England. He's actually in London at the time when Edward the Confessor dies there. So let's just go with that. So he's Harold Godwinson. Yeah, is that okay? So he was Earl of Wessex. He's pretty powerful. He very quickly seeks to establish his power. So the other big power block around at the time is another family, and he takes the opportunity to. He keeps life easy. Let's go with that. And he marries the daughter of the old Earl of Mercia, Elfgar, who was previously married to the King of Wales, Griffith ap Llywelyn. Apologies for the pronunciation there, but I tried. I do at least know that some of these doubles, double D and double L, are not what I think they are in Welsh. Wait till you get onto my attempts at Norwegian. Ha ha ha. Apparently they like having a little O over some A's, and I have no idea what that means. So Harold Godwinson marries this other family that were kind of the big opponents, or the other big power block in England, which we can kind of think of as the Mercians. So he has Wessex, which is kind of his, which is one of the roughly 3 big bits of England. He marries to get. So he marries to get. There goes the little thing. Mercia. Yeah. Now his brother, Tostig, who we will come on to, had been the Earl of Northumberland, which at this point is much bigger than our current Northumberland and goes all the way down to kind of York and things. But his brother managed to be sufficiently irritating that apparently he was driven out and replaced by the Earl of Mercia's brother. So now Harold's brother-in-law. So Harold's brother has been driven out of Northumberland by the Northumbrians, and replaced by the person who is now his brother-in-law. The reason this is a little bit interesting is that Harold Godwinson already kind of had a wife. And in the kind of histories, she's described as his common law wife. And then this other wet marriage is a better described as a kind of dynastic marriage or church-approved one. How true this is, unclear, but it does appear he had a pet Archbishop of Canterbury who may or may not have been officially approved, who crowned him king, and so seems would sign off on whatever he wanted. Conveniently, both of the women he married were called Edith, and the new one, who had been married to King of Wales and was sister to these two to these two earls. So he was that already. So Northumberland and Mercia. She was apparently at least very pretty. So bonus. And he really doesn't have to worry about getting the name wrong, because they're both called Edith or some variation on that. I mean, it's spelled Ealgith, but at least according to Wikipedia. But we'll go with Edith. It's easier. So that's Harold. Now, what happens is fairly quickly after this. So that was in January. So by about March, April time, two other people have come forward as major claimants to the throne. And Harold, his brother Tostig, who was the Earl of Northumberland until the Northumbrians decided that he was too much for them, what's the best way of putting it? He's basically looking to get back into power. So he is floating around seeing who he can get help from. Another factor in this is going to be Malcolm III of Scotland, who may or may not be one of the ones involved with the historical Macbeth. I forget. But Malcolm is, how can we put this? Doing the traditional pre-Act of Union Scottish thing of, or at least pre-dual monarchy, thing of trying to make the most of England being disrupted to, stir the pot and make things worse, because they just do. That's what they do. So we have William of Normandy. Now, the reason I'm being a little bit careful about that is, so he's the main William we're going to be talking about here. So that at least makes life easier. In history, before he invades England and becomes William I, he's either known as William, Duke of Normandy, or reference is made to the fact that he was not a legitimate son of his father. He was born from a mistress, concubine, consort, whatever, but not married. But because that is now a naughty word, we won't use that. So William of Normandy is sitting in, unsurprisingly, Normandy with a group of Normans, which is Norsemen, who had settled there from about the 900s and accepted a dukedom from the kings of the French. King of France at the moment is who did I think who was the king of France at the moment? Philippe the First, or Philippe the Amorous. Pass. Haven't bothered looking into him too much. He's a bit busy trying to run France, which, for this period at least, is a giant mess of very powerful counties and duchies, which the French king only has fairly nominal control over, with most of the power held regionally and actually relatively little power centrally held. Obviously, that's going to change. And then the other person who's making a claim is Harald, King of Norway, who is generally known as Hadrada, which I'm going to spell the Norwegian way. In England, we tend to, I think, to emphasize the fact that you pronounce the last one, we tend to stick an A on there because we also don't use that little O over the A. But we'll call him Hadrada for now. Because frankly, it's easier. So he's in Norway. Now, he's just spent the last 15 years or so trying to conquer Denmark, ruled by Svein Estridsson, unsuccessfully. Before that, he'd spent a long period in exile and made it all the way to Byzantium, Constantinople, where he was part of the Varangian Guard. He had lots of adventures. He'd been hanging out with the Kievan Rus. He'd been all over. He sounds like he was a complete adventurer, in the not necessarily so positive sense of the term, but quite fun. And now, key things are Harold has. So the other thing is right. This is an early stage in sort of things developing. You've just had the House of Wessex kind of really petering out under the kind of this House of Wessex. So Edward the Confessor was kind of a younger brother of somebody, and no heirs for quite no decent candidates for heir for quite some time. So we've had a lot of issues around who's going to inherit the throne. And what we are dealing with is various power plays. And one of the crucial things about all three of these men, who are the candidates, Harold, William, and Hadrada, one of the crucial points about them is that they all have multiple sons, possibly too many. If you look at the civil wars and things that happen amongst William the Conqueror's sons in history, but they all have multiple sons who have achieved kind of young adulthood at the time, so they're in their mid to late teens at least. They are of fighting age. So, you're not going to have these same issues. They've got more than an heir and a spare each, and they are all still men in their prime, or at least we think of them in their prime. They're canny. They've all been rollicking around for a good couple of decades, gaining experience, surviving, winning, or at least surviving. Again, sometimes it feels as though in things like the early Middle Ages that they are the same thing, because chance and luck has such a role to play. So, what happens in history? And then where are we diverting? So, we've got our three candidates. Harold, who we might say possession is 9/10 of the law. Yeah? We've got William, the I want a better honorific. He is coming from Normandy, so he is going to attack the south. Yeah? So he's going to attack the south of England. If you want to know where Normandy is, I suggest you look up 1944. That's the other time Normandy really gets interesting. And then we have Hadrada, who, as I said, I am going to refer to as that, because otherwise you will just go Harold, and everyone spells them differently in the books, although this is, of course, well before spelling is in any way standardized, so, that's what it's worth. And he is coming from Norway, via Scotland. And if you want to look at maps of that, I would refer you to my Invasion of Norway videos. And who says history doesn't repeat itself? So what happened? So both of these characters. So he's been in charge since January. Yeah. Both of these guys are trying to get. Let's pop this up here. See if you can see it for now. So he is trying to. No, that's probably a bit far, just with the way I've zoomed. So he's in power since Jan, and has a pretty secure claim. He's married into the other main power block family in England, so shouldn't have too much in the way of internal dissent. His problem is he has two big threats to his kingdom. Now, Wessex in the south is his heartland, is his main area. So that's where he's basing himself for now, ready to face off against William, who's only across in Normandy, which will only take a day or two to cross, and then you're only a couple of days march or sailing around to get to London. And what he's got is the threat from Hadrada being countered by his new brothers-in-law, who he probably trusts about as far as he can throw all of them together. Because, wouldn't you not trust them? But it's in their interests to keep hold of power, because they've managed to get the earldom of Northumbria from this Harold's brother, Tostig, who is hanging out with him. So Tostig is going to want Northumbria back, which would mean that they'd be thrown out of power. So it's in their interest to fight them. But should William get power, they would stand a reasonable chance of getting a. They'd stand a reasonable chance of getting to keep their power. So it's very much in Godwinson's interest to keep keep these brothers-in-law up north to protect his north from raids from the Scots and his brother Tostig, who's just kind of been going around, because he'd only been deposed like a year before in the 1065 or so. So he'd only been left power then, and had then kind of bounced round the periphery of England, had spent time in Normandy, had then gone to Norway. He was generally just being a pain in the bum. So Hadrada. Now, what happens in history is Hadrada. So they're both. Sorry, I've drifted off the point for quite a long time now. Terribly sorry. Feel free to. Hopefully you've skipped forward. So what happens in history? So both of these guys are collecting together war fleets for much of the year. So they both start in sort of March, April time, which is probably about as early as they hear of the death of Edward and kind of have a chance to do anything, because personally, as much as I would like to be the bearer of good news to either of these guys, crossing the Channel, or in particular the North Sea, in January to March, in those times, I mean, hell, any time, is not a huge amount of fun. The weather is not going to be great. I'd definitely be thinking of using the Channel Tunnel, but it's still about 1,000 years away from opening, so which sucks. Anyway, what happens in historically is Hadrada lands first, and then William of Normandy lands. So poor Godwinson has to dash north, and so what happens is, essentially, Hadrada lands with Tostig and a load of men lent by Malcolm of Scotland in. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. In kind of mid-September, almost exactly the same time that actually William the Conqueror in history lands, but he's just ahead of it, and he's been raiding up and down for a week or so beforehand, making a nuisance of himself up north before he properly lands to try and actually take the big city, which is Jorvik, sorry, around now. So what happens in history is, so Harold, having hung around all summer waiting for somebody to invade down south, which is his heartland, thinking that will work, the people he's left in charge up there, his two brothers-in-law, Morcar and thingy, what's it? Yeah. Yeah, can't remember. Didn't write down his name. I know one of them's called Morcar. The other one's probably got one of the other handful of names they use around then. Probably Edgar or something. Edwin, sorry, Earl of Mercia. So he'd left them in charge up there. Now, what happens in history is those two are defeated at the Battle of Fulford, which is just outside York. They are sufficiently badly defeated that York falls, and then Harold has to dash up north with kind of a mobile elite corps to fight them at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, which he wins decisively, killing his brother and Hadrada. So that's what happens in real history. But at almost exactly the same time, William of Normandy has left Normandy, lands in England, lands on the south coast, and that's when Godwinson has to then dash back down south, doesn't have time to summon the Fyrd, the kind of, for want of a better term, local levies or whatever, to supplement his forces particularly, and has to kind of drive straight in to try and stop them from getting too much of a foothold and being very difficult to drive off. Yeah, that's what happens in history. But apparently, and I say apparently because I was just having a quick refresher before writing this, and it's all slightly approximate because we're talking deep history. If it's 1,000 years ago, pretty deep history compared with what I normally do, which is kind of more World War II-ish, where I'm kind of looking at an hour-by-hour breakdown from reports. In this, it's kind of month-by-month almost. William had apparently been sitting, waiting to cross and waiting for the weather to be favourable for about a month. So here's our alternate. This is same lineup, but William crosses first. Now, Harold has been waiting for this. So Harold Godwinson has. By the way, there's no coordination between the two invading forces, except for the fact that Tostig has kind of been floating around trying to see which he can exploit more and better. So, William of Normandy crosses, lands probably about as he does, but he's maybe doing it a month earlier. So let's say he crosses and lands on about the 18th of August. So if he lands on the 14th of August on the south coast, as per history, he kind of maybe gets to Pevensey, then moves a bit east to Sussex, which at the time seems to be a good good place to be landing. It gets him a bit closer to London in terms of both a direct invasion and also sailing his fleet round. And it's quite a long coast, and it's Harold Godwinson's heartland. London isn't as powerful and important as it will become, but it is kind of the heart of the kingdom that's now been unified as England, land of the Angles, Angleland. Yeah, it's not as decisive to hold it, but it's definitely in a different category to all the other things, all the other cities in the and places in the kingdom. So I reckon that a fast rider would be able to, dispatch rider would get the message about William landing and kind of properly landing and setting things up, presumably where he does really, which is kind of Hastings sort of way, within a day or two. And he's been prepared for this, so I'm going to say that he has his forces ready to move at fairly short notice. So that's going to be his core of kind of elite soldiery, housecarls and things. And he has spent the summer preparing for this. So he has turned the local Fyrd. I may be saying this wrong. Fyrd seems to be how we typically spell it, which is kind of the local forces in the area. He's presumably been training them, drilling them, sending out his elites to work with them so that they are effective. These are the troops he doesn't really have in the historical Battle of Hastings, because he's had to disperse them and then pull them back together. So at this point he has them. So he'll have sent out the messengers to say, meet me here. So he's going to be getting people from, he'll be taking with him the Fyrd of London, Middlesex, Essex, Surrey, bits of Kent, bits of Sussex as they come up and come down. Now, what I would imagine is happening is that the guys along the coast, so Hampshire, Sussex, and Kent, will be looking to defend themselves, but the other areas kind of around there, which are very close, so it's effectively the home counties today, will be in a position to offer a mobile portion of their Fyrd at least to go and help, and then you'll also get he'll also be collecting everyone from that bit of Sussex who isn't immediately kind of looking to defend their immediate bit of land. He'll be looking to them to join him as well. So he's going to have a bigger and better force. Now, it sounds, and also a better drilled force that he has worked with better, that is going to be better led. Now, the Normans don't really have a dramatically different way of fighting to the Anglo-Saxons. They possibly got more of an interest in cavalry, by which I mean fighting on or from horseback, which would make sense if they've spent over 100 years on the continent, because that's going to be another effective way of fighting and communicating and generally doing things. Whereas in England, you're much more like the Scandinavians, where you are using your horses are more likely to be something you have captured, having gone somewhere in a ship or a boat. You don't necessarily have trained war horses. What you have is horses that are potentially borrowed or stolen as booty from where you've landed, and which you then use for transport. So they're more mounted infantry than cavalry. So it improves your speed of advance, it improves your flexibility, but you're not using them as mounted shock troops. Although the use as mounted shock troops is still fairly new and and William has not necessarily been able to bring that many of those across because horses do not like getting into ships. Horses are difficult to transport this way because at this point we're talking fairly small ships, so you've probably had to use a crane and a belly sling to get these horses into the ship's hold, because you're not going to have them on deck, you're going to have them in the hold, in effectively a bit of a stable, so that they don't know what's going on really. And so although in theory you could kind of walk them onto the ship, and that seems sensible with a kind of whatever, what you can't really do, and you don't have enough space on your boats, is to get them to then walk down inside on the boat. So you have to crane them in and then crane them out. And given that these are now war horses, which are trained to fight and be unhappy and display their unhappiness, I don't want to be pissing them off, because they will be trained to bite and kick and be vicious, and these will be big horses that are strong, even if they're not big like modern horses, because they've not bred them that way. These are going to be really tough animals. So not so many of them to make a decisive advantage, and William needs to move quickly because he doesn't have secure lines of supply or anything. There's going to be the whole thing of living off the land, but this is very much Harold Godwinson's home turf, so he's not going to be having an easy time of it in terms of turning people to his side. So he needs to press on. He needs to work quickly. He doesn't have time to dither and build up his forces and get comfortable and da 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 da. So he's got to push and attack. At this point, Godwinson wins by just stopping him, for now at least. Can't do that in the long term because there's still the threat to the north, but at the moment the north is safe and secure, at least as far as he knows. And he's got what should be a good solid blocking force up there. So he can take his time to pen in and wear down William, because the longer William isn't successful, the more his support will drift away, because a lot of his force is going to be made up of people who aren't like massively loyal. They're kind of there because they think they're going to do well out of it, but they're a little bit peripheral and a little bit flaky. This is why it's taken them, both him and Hadrada, months to assemble their invasion fleets and armies. So anyway, big battle, and I see it going totally differently. In fact, I just kind of flipped it. So I figure that a lucky arrow from one of the Saxon Fyrd will get William in the eye, enraged, knowing that things aren't going well. He will lead a futile, forlorn charge up the hill, which the English army has had the discipline to remain on in the face of the Norman attack, rather than the historical thing where they feigned a retreat and then, sorry, what happened in history is the Normans supposedly feigned retreat and then caught less experienced bits of Godwinson's army as they pursued. And they were caught and they were slaughtered, and that's kind of how the battle was won. With a better disciplined army, that's a fairly obvious tactic. That's something you know people are going to do, so you're going to keep your lines whilst you do it. Plus, Harold has more troops, so can afford to maybe send some reserves down who will be better disciplined to pursue and exploit if it is a real thing, but he'll have reserves he can backfill that bit of the line into, rather than just losing that portion of his force. So William would then, I think, try to lead a Last gasp charge, he's wounded. He may or may not survive, having the arrow through the eye, but equally it's not necessarily immediately lethal as an attack, and would be going straight for Harold Godwinson's central position. They're going to try and achieve a, I guess, coup de main feels like it's the right sort of term. You know, they're going to try and do something decisive and win by knocking out the heart and soul of the English army, which is Harold, who is the kind of linchpin at the moment. He's not had long enough to establish his reign so well that he can be sure that his sons would take power. There's an incredibly good chance that his new brothers-in-law would try and turn and seize the throne, because frankly that's what they did in history, I think, pretty much. So bang, they are pushing, and they're coming up against a shield wall. Now horses won't charge down a shield wall, and this is going to be the elite shield wall around Harold. So they're not going to get anywhere. They don't necessarily have the formal, well-drilled charge down the, which in any case doesn't work against a kind of shield wall or pike wall, which is effectively what we're dealing with. You know, it's a load of men, several rows deep for strength, with shields locked like a load of riot police. Is probably the closest thing most of us will have seen, except instead of carrying truncheons, what they have is spears, which are going to be bloody nasty. And the front rank are kind of maybe holding spears, maybe they're holding the shorter swords, maybe some of them got these big axes, big long great axes, which was apparently a fairly distinctive weapon, which is going to be a big long shaft, shafted weapon, probably longer than my arm span in this camera, with a big, fairly big head, probably quite a big hook bit to enable it to grab somebody's shield and pull it down. So that's one of its tactics, as well as being able to just apply a huge amount of force, like a almost like a sledgehammer with an edge. So that's pretty nasty. And so the Normans aren't going to be kind of charging in like the stereotype knights on horseback in kind of heavy plate armor. They've got mail. They will have more sort of a spear, and they've got their kite shields, and they've got helmets, but they don't have the kind of solid heavy stuff. Their horses will have probably maybe padded armor at most, which is, you know, really effective and will potentially be more effective against an arrow than mail would be or something. But, you know, the horses won't charge this down. You know, you'll never get a horse to do something that stupid, because horses are smarter than people, it seems. So charging down, and so it's going to end up in a melee, in a vicious sort of swiping swords, because the spears you're going to be poking with the spears, but then somebody's going to come along and, you know, your spear's going to be attacking somebody a bit further away, but actually you've got to defend yourself, and all messy. And I can just see William getting hacked to pieces with these huge axes. And the Normans are just going to be swarmed, and yes, they'll have advantage of height, but they don't have advantage of numbers in this, and it will be a bloody fight, but they will go down. So Harold is now King of England and has a secure southern frontier in sort of mid to late August. Life is good. Slight problem. Hadrada sailed at about the same sort of time as William. Good weather is good weather across the whole region. Now, Hadrada has come via the islands up in what are now Scotland, but actually they went north. So the Orkneys and Shetlands. He's picked up men there. He's come down the coast. He has picked up, I think in history it's some. Again, I've just gone with Wikipedia for a quick reminder, but maybe another 2,000 men from King Malcolm of Scotland. So he's ended up with about 10,000 men. And after raiding down the coast of Northumbria, which is really going to help make you welcome amongst the local population in Northumbria. Well done, Tostig. Brilliant bit of PR there. You deposed me last year. I want my place back. To do that, I'm going to burn your villages and steal your gold, so that I can then be your lord and responsible for your well-being again. Does that work? I don't think it does. Anyway, I say Tostig seems to be a tosser. But we've now eliminated William of Normandy. So Godwinson is not dim, unlike Tostig. So he knows that there's still a threat coming from the north, from the Norse. Yes, these words are all actually linked. So what's going to happen is I would see him moving his kind of court, because remember the kind of, we're still in an era where the monarchy is mostly a bit itinerant. There's the kind of capital at Winchester, which was the heart of Wessex. You've got London, which is kind of it sits on the border. It sits on the traditional border between Wessex and Mercia. You then have Mercia in the middle, and then you've got Northumbria further up north, kind of centered on a mix of, it's kind of got, so that's got a heartland which is kind of based on the place which Bernard Cornwell has set all of the Alfred the Great stories, Babensberg. Yeah, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. Bamborough, or Bamborough. So there's that, but then there's also the wider bit which goes a lot much further. So it's really north of the Humber, Northumbria, and so York is a major city there, and has been since Roman times, since probably pre-Roman times, and it's now kind of Jorvik. So we're going to have something different happening here, which is that. So I would see Harold, if he's got any sense, he's going to move his court probably towards the Midlands, because he knows what's going to come. And Nottingham is a great place to be basing himself, because you've got the River Trent, which allows you to get on boats and get out to the North Sea. So if things are going wrong there, you are a good chunk of the way north towards any invasion coming that way. But you can also get south, so you're not showing that you obviously distrust your brothers-in-law, but equally, this is actually more their heartland in Mercia. This is your new wife's home territory, and actually your brothers-in-law are up in the north, securing Morcar of Northumbria's new thing, and so they're basing themselves up in York. So you've got kind of people, and you can have sent other people. I would see a detachment of loyalists being sent to, say, Lincoln, which is also a good sort of position. It's on the Roman road network. It's another of these kind of core towns and cities throughout the eras. And you've also probably pushed some more forces up to York at least, as well. So the forces facing Hadrada and Tostig at around York, at what historically is the Battle of Fulford, are stronger, Now, the Battle of Fulford in history is apparently a slaughter. Somehow, the two leaders, these two brothers, survive, but their forces are wiped out, pretty much, and to the point where the Saxon, the big Hadrada's army doesn't take too much in the way of casualties. They're still strong, and they're able to follow up and quickly take York. So Fulford's only a couple of miles from York, and the defeat is sufficiently bad that kind of it's stripped the garrison, and so suddenly what should be a really good defensive city, if you've ever been to York, it's got gorgeous walls still. It had those sorts of things in Roman times, you know. And yes, the walls we currently see are medieval, but there are Roman bits, so this was a secure city. And so what I see happening is, yeah, Hadrada is still going to win, but the forces he's facing are stronger, so his victory is going to be less complete. I see the Northumbrians contingent of the force focusing on the Scots, because that is a two-way hatred, just endemic warfare for centuries around here, along that sort of border between the kind of the lowlands of Scotland and Northumbria. They've been divided for and kind of hostile since the Romans came along and started trying to divide things up, really, I think. Pre them, it was probably a bit more flexible, but there's now that definite barrier between kind of the Scottish, the English bit, Northumbrian bit, and then which then becomes part of England. And there's kind of the border zone, which is going to be bad until you get the union of the two crowns, which is still, 600 years off, nearly 550 years. So, boom, big battle. Hadrada has taken heavier losses, and the English forces are going to retreat in good order to York. Hadrada is now facing a problem. He still has a strong Norwegian force, but Tostig is proving to be less useful just now, because it turns out that people can remember last year and what he's just done. So although he knows the area, he's actually managed to annoy a lot of people and doesn't have many friends. Fortunately, the bulk of the losses were among the Scots, who had joined Hadrada. So his kind of core is safe, but the English forces have managed to retreat into York in good order, and he can't take York. Now, he's now in a pickle. He's now caught between Harold Godwinson coming up from the south. He's caught against York, which he can't ignore. He can't take York without suffering huge casualties, or possibly even just being defeated with huge casualties. He can't leave York because too many troops got in there, and if he exposes his rear, it'll be a nightmare, So he's about to be caught in a two-front war, which, as pretty much anyone except Julius Caesar will tell you, is a not good thing. So what's he going to do? I think the answer is obvious. He's going to call it quits. This guy's sensible. He's a pragmatist. He has spent 12 years trying to invade Denmark. He only gave up on that about 2 years before and kind of started getting interested in England as an alternative option, trying to recreate Canute's kind of North Sea Empire. I can't see him winning, honestly, against this kind of force. And so he's going to take to his ships. He's going to go home. He's probably got, I don't know, still got 7,500, 8,000 troops. So in history, he's estimated to have had about 9,000 at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, which was where he was ultimately defeated in history. I'm saying he's taken some more losses, so do that. But equally, he's kind of got his core, and it's not his troops who have suffered the majority of the casualties. So he's going to go back to Norway to do things differently. So where does this leave us? Well, we still have a king from the House of Wessex. We have Saxon. We still have the kind of Saxon kingdom of England still stands. It's not hugely secure under Harold Godwinson. He is theoretically now allied with the kings of Mercia. He has married the daughter of that family, and will probably look to intermesh the families more because he already has a load of adult sons who he doesn't want to disinherit because they're too useful. So he's not necessarily looking to make an heir that way, but he probably wants to bring them into the fold and enmesh the two families. It so happens that this wife of his was previously married to the King of Wales, so who ruled all of Wales, and they were allies of the Mercians as well. So he can hope to try and pull that in. He wants to try and get a. It's a really difficult game of balances for him because his own family are trouble. His his own brother was basically looking for an entry with both William and then Harald Hadrada to get back into power. He has these two brothers-in-law who, as I say, I wouldn't necessarily trust, but who are out for themselves. But at the same time, he needs to work with them, so he's going to try and, enmesh them in the family. I think he's got sisters or maybe daughters he can marry them off to. He can try and sort that out. He can try and bring Wales into the fold, not in a kind of Norman invasion type scenario, but in a more peaceful assimilation type way. Normandy is going to be a mess. William died. He had several sons who would be of about fighting age, but he's also got plenty of enemies and things, so that's going to be a huge mess. Harald Hadrada, however, being a pragmatist, I think at this point will turn to more traditional Norse activities of going off adventuring. And so whether that is trade, whether that's raid, a little bit of both, all over the place. I mean, he might even try and make a play for Normandy itself, but I think more likely, hopefully, he will limit himself because he'd have problems ruling those two with Denmark and England still not friends of his and not part of his empire. So I see him trying to do that. So that's what I think happens. I'm afraid I don't see a Norwegian king of England and a big North Sea empire that way, but I do see potentially a really interesting Norway and an interesting England. Anyway, that's it. Ta-da!